So prayer is powerful. Prayer is crucial. We got all the verses about it. We have all the stories of when we pray, these things begin to happen. And even if we have those stories and those experiences that all of us have, where we are praying and things don't seem to be happening, situations don't seem to be changing, nations don't seem to be changing, we still know deep down that God is who he says he is. His promises are true. And those verses about what God promises in relation to prayer is true. We just yet haven't seen it in all its fullness. And the idea of the kingdom come, but the kingdom not yet in so many different ways. And so there's been a kind of growth in interest and passion for prayer, which is fantastic. But I find sometimes when I'm speaking to people, particularly those of us who are trying to reach out to Muslims, and we see that there seems to be a great correlation between prayer and Muslims coming to Jesus, and which would make sense because, as some of my friends say, only a prayer movement will reach a prayer movement, and ultimately, Islam is a prayer movement, and it's going to be reached by us demonstrating another prayer movement, the pursuit and intimacy that we find in our prayer lives. But it's very easy then just to think of this as one of the kind of tools or one of these things that we have to do if we desire to see kind of Muslims come to Jesus. We need to learn the language. We need to find a way of remaining in these countries, and we need to pray. And I think sometimes in that kind of environment, we begin to forget what it's about. And this, for me, I'm so passionate about, partly because I've seen this in my own life, where it's become about prayer and answers to prayer and these issues to prayer, that I forget who it's about. It's about Jesus. It's one of the things I hate about being a parent sometimes, when it feels like the kids are trying to get things out of me rather than they want to just be with me. So prayer is about Jesus. And you might say, how can you do that? How can you lose sight of that? Well, apart from me kind of just sharing my story like I just did, I think you can see this in different ways. Maybe to give you another example, there's a church in the UK that was, famous worldwide. They wrote lots of songs that were used all across the world in worship. But they kind of realized at one point in their history that their focus, the heart of worship, had just become about worship and about songs. And in it, in some ways, they'd forgotten about Jesus. So they had a period of time, I think it was kind of like weeks, maybe even months, where they didn't have maybe kind of formal worship how they normally did it, how one would expect it to be. And the first song that they wrote when they began to maybe go back to normality was, "We're coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you, Jesus." And I think I could say that for prayer. We're coming back to the prayer, and what it's all about is you, Jesus. How many of our prayers, how many of the prayer meetings that we go to, is it about Him, or is it all just to do with asking, I want this, I need this? And that's important. We're told in the Bible, Paul said to Timothy, to intercede for, different people in different situations. But in the midst of all that, we can forget about Jesus. I love this quote by Pete Greig, who started kind of 24/7 prayer, the organization, the movement. And he said, prayer is a life-changing power, passionately seeking the Father's presence in a particular place. I want to just take some time just to kind of look at this, because it's this passionate seeking the Father's presence. It's not passionately seeking God for what he can do, that there is that power dynamic. It makes the Father, it makes God the central place. So let me just unpack it first. This passionately seeking him. When I think of that, I just think of this kind of verse that we find in Psalm 63. And I'm actually just going to use the um, this kind of translation of it, where it says here, "You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there is no water." I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory. Because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live, and in your name I will lift up my hands. I will be fully satisfied as with the richness of food. With singing lips, my mouth will praise you. On my bed, I will remember you. I will think of you through the watches of the night, because you are my help. I sing in the shadow of your wings. I cling to you. Your right hand upholds me. Let's kind of just camp here for a moment. This for me should be the essence, the heartbeat, the foundation, the soil, the roots, whatever language you want to use for what prayer means. As Pete Greig said, passionately seeking him. I mean, look at some of the verbs and the adverbs there. Seeking, thirsting, earnestly, my whole being, seeing or beholding, praising you. As long as I live, the just the verbs and the adverbs go on. You kind of just pick up from that kind of hunger, desperation, kind of that real earnestness. And I think it's easy just to do that. And for me, and for those who don't know, I was born in Colombia, South America. So there's that kind of Latino, passionate dynamic in me, which I don't sometimes see with some of my fellow Brits. Kind of stiff upper lip. But we need to have that earnestness. When I'm teaching this sometimes in person, I sometimes have like a £10, in cash in my hand, and I sometimes say, who wants this? And often the people who are listening to me teach kind of look at me and kind of think, what's he doing? What it's about? And I go, hey, it's here. It's the first person who comes to the front, they can have it. And many people kind of want that £10 note. They might put up the hand and say, yeah, I want that £10 note. But very few people come and just kind of grab hold of it. Saying that, I do remember once I was teaching at a conference, and this person was just about ran out to get it. And they were just about to get it, and this lady jumped and kind of like rugby tackle them, maybe American football tackle them to the ground. I thought I was going to have like a major injury. And for me, that's kind of what it's like. It's like, I must have it. Not like, oh, I'll be nice. Be nice to see you. It might be nice to kind of get a little bit of water. No, it's like, I need this. If I don't have this, I'm going to die. It's like my whole being, everything in me is like longing for you, yearning for you. Nothing else will satisfy. Who else can compare with you? And we need to have this kind of yearning and seeking after God. And I think we kind of become easy and content in our environment. I think context is everything. Like I say, if I'd kind of do that £10 in the UK, yeah, somebody eventually kind of come along and grab it. If I did the same when I'm kind of visiting Egypt and kind of waved around the same amount of money, man, I could create a stampede, because there's a realization of the lack and a realization of the real need and desperation for something. Let us be people who are hungry and desiring that. It's a bit like another verse that we find in Psalm 27, verse 4. It says, it's written by David. It says, one thing I ask of the Lord, this is what I desire, is to behold you in the temple. One thing. Could that be said of me? Could that be said of us? They say you can learn a lot about a person and his values by looking at what they pray for. If somebody gave me the transcript of my prayers that I prayed during the day, during the week, and then they analyzed it, how much of my prayer, time, and focus is just on Jesus? Now, you might easily say, well, I've got all these different things. I've got these issues. You don't know what's happening in my life. It's really difficult. It's all these chaotic things happening. And I'm sure maybe some of you listening do have those kind of situations. It might be even be life and death situations. But one thing I like about Psalm 27 is when you look at the context when that psalm was written, David was kind of on the run. It was a dangerous time. It was a crazy time. It would have been so easy for David's prayer, the focus of his prayer, to be in a whole load of different other areas. It's like one thing I ask, Lord, deliverance from this situation, deliverance from people that are trying to kill me. But no, it's like, God, in spite of all that's happening here, one thing I ask, if I can only have one thing, is you. Oh God, let that be the cry and the prayer of my heart and my yearning after him. Seeking him and him alone. You see, we're so easy pulled away by different things. A passage I've been thinking a lot about is Luke 10, right? The end of Luke 10, we have a story where Jesus went and visited a couple of ladies, Mary and Martha. And Martha's kind of busy, just trying to get all the food ready, and that kind of makes sense. Having lived in the Middle East, I know how important food and hospitality, and if you didn't do that, it would be shameful. Yet Jesus kind of calls her, he says, Martha, Martha, when your name gets called twice, you know that, something's happening. And he says, you're concerned with all these other things, but Mary has chosen something better. It's like, Martha, you're caught up, your focus, maybe to use our language, your prayer is on about all these other things. But Mary has chosen the better thing. Now, the Greek that's used there about Martha, being drawn away, is kind of pulled apart, torn. These are strong words. Jesus is saying to Martha, in the midst of everything you're doing, you've been pulled apart, you've been torn. Gotta be like Mary. Let your full attention, let your full focus, let the center of your prayer and your desire be for intimacy. So just like in that example, it would be terrible if I was organizing a meal for you and getting everything together and ready, but I missed you. It'd be like, why did you invite me to your house? You just caught up in everything. It would have been strange. But so often we do that in prayer. We get caught up in all the requests and all the things that we neglect who it's all about. Jesus. Let us be passionate pursuers of him. Going back to what he said, seeking the Father's presence in a particular place. One of the things that often comes up when I'm talking about prayer, and particularly when we're talking about kind of quantity of prayer that we do, and this will come up later when we talk about quality, something we don't normally talk about. People say I don't have enough time to pray. And there's ways of doing life where we can learn, begin to seek the presence of God in a particular place, just making our attitude and a posture towards God prayer, so that everything that we do is prayer. Whether we're going shopping, whether we're picking up the children, whether we're doing whatever job that we have, whether we're opening emails and responding to emails, that all of this begins to be prayer. I remember when I got married to Katie, one of the songs we had was, make me a prayer. Let my life be a prayer. And that was a genuine heart desire of Katie myself. And I have to keep coming back to that. Because sometimes I just think I fit in. And there are those times, and we all know that's important, be it like you got 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 15 minutes or an hour, we begin to create habits of life-giving prayer, separate from all else that's happening around us. But there's also an acknowledgement that our lives are busy and we can't always do that. And we've got to make our lives and the things that we do become prayer. I think a great example of this is sunflowers. And I had this question, I don't have that much time, like I talked about, and I asked this question: how can you take everyday, ordinary task lives and use them as a springboard of a lifestyle prayer? give you a simple example, and I'm trying, as I get an email, rather than responding straight away, reflect on it, pray into it, and then do it. As I go and get my kids, be praying about them. As I'm waiting and get stuck in traffic jams, using that time to pray, rather than just kind of checking up on the news or Facebook or whatever is your social media of choice. I believe that kind of prayer and what God wants us to be, and kind of you see a little bit in Pete Greig's quote, is to be like sunflowers. I don't know if you've ever seen those kind of films or clips where they speed shrink up. And if you do it with sunflowers, you see that the sunflowers just follows the sun through the day. They live with this awareness and they respond to the presence of the sun. They do this even if it's cloudy. And this is my prayer. God, let my heart, let my posture, my heart be like a sunflower. That I just seek you throughout the day, that my heart is just going towards you, seeking you, praying to you, towards you. And that might not be kind of grand words of intercession. It might be some of the deepest and greatest prayer that there is, which is, God, I love you. And then responding to the love that God gives to us. And then going, I love you. And then going, oh, thank you for your love. Thank you. Responding. I'm not talking maybe necessarily about complex and contemplated prayer, but just really just simple prayer to him. One of the things I love about sunflowers is they don't wilt at night or close as sunflowering plants do in the response to a lack of light. Instead, sunflowers turn towards the east, seemingly awaiting the sun rise again. May this again be like our hearts, always waiting to turn, ready for God's next whisper, next invitation to press into the intimacy of who he is. So prayer is important. Prayer is vital. Nothing happens without prayer. We need to press into prayer, grow in prayer. But in all the activity of prayer, let us not lose sight of who it's all about. It's about God. It's about sitting at his feet, speaking to him speaking to us. And maybe even though one of the greatest level of prayer is just sitting in silence, kind of contemplative prayer. I'm going to finish with a story that gives an example of that. Somebody was interviewing this lady called Mother Teresa. She lived a number of years ago. I remember her. And she was kind of seen, I think the Catholics actually made her a saint, but she was a kind of very saintly, very holy lady. And they were asking about her prayer life. And somebody said to Mother Teresa, what do you say to God in prayer? And she says, oh, I say nothing. I just listen. And so they said, well, what does God say to you? And she said, oh, he doesn't say anything. He just listens. And I think the interviewer was kind of like confused, but anybody who's been married for a long time, and I've not been married that long, over 25 years. But I see this increasingly in my relationship with Katie, and I certainly see this sometimes with older people that you watch who are in love. They just hold hands, they look at each other, and they don't often have to say anything because there's just that place of intimacy and love that's grown over a period of time. They don't need words. Let us be people that passionately pursue the Father's presence in this present moment, in the present situations that we are in, whatever that may look like. May we practice the presence of God. May we practice prayer in every moment.